Welcome back to Buddhist Beliefs, Practices, and Debates. We're now in week 3 with doctrinal distinctions. In order to discuss Buddhist beliefs and practices and even debates, it's important to become familiar with some of the largest doctrinal groups in Buddhism, their values, their perspectives, and their morality. As indicated at the beginning of this course, it's important to become familiar with some of the key terms in a religion, as it helps us begin to grasp the perspectives and the ideas within that religion. In Mahayana Buddhism, there are particular terms that are important to become aware of to understand the philosophy of Mahayana Buddhism. The first of these is samsara. Samsara is the cycle of transmigration, the cycle of rebirths as we die and get reborn again and again. Dukkha means suffering. And if you remember from the Four Noble Truths, it's a very important focus in Buddhist texts and doctrine. Shila means morality, like the Panchashila, the 5 moral precepts we discussed earlier. Klesha is the habitual dispositions, the karmic imprints that we develop when we begin to get addicted to anything in particular. It can be self-loathing, like people who smoke cigarettes and they smoke the cigarettes because they're self-loathing, and then they might stop smoking cigarettes but transfer that klesha, that karmic imprint, to something else, like overeating. The anatman is one of the important cornerstones of Buddhist philosophy, as it separates Buddhist philosophy from all of its competitors at the time that it was developing. Anatman means no self or no soul. And the 3 really important philosophical stances in Buddhism, in Mahayana Buddhism, would be anitya, which means impermanence, pratityasamutpada, which means dependent origination or interdependence, and shunyata, which means emptiness. And we'll discuss these last 3 in great detail in the preceding parts of this lecture. Mahayana schools originated in South Asia and spread outward into Tibet, China, Korea, Japan, Vietnam, and many more. Among its famous schools are Madhyamaka, created and founded by Nagarjuna in the 2nd century CE. There were many other famous Buddhist monastic scholars that contributed to Madhyamaka, such as Baba Viveka or Chandrakirti. Followers of Madhyamaka strongly reject these epistemological extremes that we've covered in this class, such as nihilism and the Atman, the eternal unchanging self. Yogacara is another very famous Mahayana school. Some of its primary, most important people who contributed to its philosophy are Asanga and Vasubandha in the 4th century CE. For Yogacara, they believe that mind mediates all phenomena, and this way we understand things through solely the mind and what the mind experiences. There are some core concepts in Mahayana Buddhism. Among these are the Buddha bodies, the Kaya bodies. In Mahayana, they're called Trikaya, 3 bodies, because the highest, most important of these bodies is the Dharmakaya. The Dharmakaya is the omniscient, the boundless state of enlightenment. It's what we cannot reach. We can only seek to understand, because it's beyond our realm of understanding. The second of these bodies is the Sambhogakaya. This is the celestial Buddha, the luminal phase, the blissful phase, in which, due to certain types of meditation, you can attain the Sambhogakaya. And in attaining this state of being, begin to glimpse the Dharmakaya, the ultimate body beyond it. But the third body, the body that we can see as we're listening to this lecture, is the Nirmanakaya. This is the physical body. So there are 3 different types of bodies exist. The Nirmanakaya, which is the physical corporeal bodies, the Sambhogakaya, which is the blissful body you get through meditation, and the Dharmakaya, the omniscient, boundless, enlightened body that you can only glimpse by being in the Sambhogakaya state of mind. There are also three very important stances in Mahayana Buddhism: impermanence, anitya; dependent origination, pratityasamutpada; and emptiness, shunyata. Impermanence is one of the core values in Mahayana Buddhism, and it's also important in Theravada Buddhism. One of the illustrations of impermanence is found in the Buddha Charita, an early biography of the Buddha. In it, the Buddha is beset by the beauty of his harem. He looks at these women and sees their beautiful curves, the smell on their bodies, their hair, their lips, and he feels drawn to them, but then begins to meditate on the beauty and realizes beauty does not last forever, that over time they will change. They will not look the same. Likewise, the Buddha realized that everything does not last forever. We can think about this today with the cells in our bodies, which are constantly breaking down and being created again. Likewise, we now know from chemistry and physics that the ground we walk on, the chairs we sit in, the desks that we work at are all breaking down on a molecular level that we cannot see. So everything around us is impermanent. Everything in us is impermanent, including our memories. Because in order to recall a memory, we have to bring it from our memory banks to our conscious state of being, which is in the present. And the minute we do so, it's altered before it's returned to our memory banks again. Nothing is permanent. And the Buddhists argue that this is the same way when it comes to the soul. They think that the soul or self is not permanent, but impermanent, which is very different than their competitors. The second of these core principles is dependent origination, pratityasamutpada, which is important in both Mahayana and Theravada Buddhism. Dependent origination explains karma, rebirth, the function of the personality, all these things, without the need for invoking the existence of the permanent self. In a sense, it explains how samsara works without bringing in a creator. What it argues is that everything needs other things to come into existence. Take, for example, a seed. In order for a seed to grow into a plant, what does it need? It needs water. It needs sunshine. It needs fertile soil. In order for there to be rain, you need to have clouds. In order for there to be sunshine, you need to have breaks in the clouds for the sun to come through. In order for there to be fertile soil, it needs to be worms that have made it fertile. And if one of these conditions stops, if it stops raining, if it stops having sunshine, what happens to the plant? It dies because it's dependent upon other things to exist. This is what it means in Buddhism to say that things don't really exist on their own because they're dependent on other things to exist. And Buddhists argue that everything is dependent upon something else to exist, just like this seed. Perhaps the best example of pratityasamutpada, dependent origination, is through the example of the self. Pratityasamutpada, or dependent origination, explains the dynamics that perpetuate the cycle of suffering and rebirth. In this model, you can notice that there is no beginning. There's no initial step, but rather it's a constant cycle. There are 12 links, each arising and ceasing due to its own causes. Thus, it is not autonomous in a substantial self, but dependent on previous conditions that bring about its own results. We can begin right now, if we want, with spiritual ignorance, which is really beginningless. It's the misperception of reality, thinking there's an Atman, there's a self or a soul when there isn't. It's the taking of what is impermanent to be permanent, perceiving that which is not the self as the self. And this brings into conditions the next chain, karmic formations. Karmic formations arise due to ignorance and are conditioned by ignorance and determine the nature of rebirth. Out of this ignorance comes thoughts, words, and actions. Thoughts, words, and actions are what are karma. You cannot have karma without a notion of the Atman, the self. So something we think is real, our happiness relies on either getting rid of or acquiring, and thus we develop hatred or attachment. And these are tendencies that shape our lives. Consciousness is conditioned by the mental formations from our past life and tied to the repository of the karmic formulations that have built up. Our consciousness conditions everything it encounters through the name and form that it observes. And our consciousness makes things fit into name and form. For example, it is a human being and her body. The body conditions the input of the sense faculty. The eye perceives the ant, for example, through the sense faculties and through the six senses. The six sense faculties are, according to Buddhist traditions, seeing, hearing, tasting, smelling, touching, and the capacity of consciousness to integrate all these. Through our six sense faculties, we are able to have contact with sense objects. This is the next step. It's a contact with the environment, and when this contact occurs, feelings arise. These feelings are emotional responses to the perception or cognition of a particular object. This is why we have different tastes. It comes from our conditions and elicits a response to the perception, a reaction, which can be a desire. Either we want or crave the object perceived, or we desire to avoid that object. This condition of grasping or clinging onto the object of desire is something that it comes about because of our desire and wanting. And grasping thus becomes the next stage, the clinging onto objects of our craving. And this clinging onto object leads to becoming. Becoming is not birth. It's simply the abstraction to be without construction. It is going from the incorporeal form to the physical form, which is birth. And we're born, which ultimately leads to old age and death. Now you might ask, why does desire occur before birth and death? Because when we are in our subtle bodies, in the intermediate state, our subtle bodies have desire, and it's those desires that pull us into the physical and make us physical. And old age and death carries the karmic imprints and the ignorance to begin the cycle again. So this is an example of how every stage begets another stage and how we come into being. So you might ask then, what makes up a person? Well, a person is a composition, according to Pratityasamutpada, of 5 psychophysical aggregates. Name and form is one of these. This is the species type, the form that comes of the species. It's the body, and the body is comprised of the constantly changing processes. It's in the state of continuous flux without our control. I mean, we cannot tell our stomach to digest a particular protein. We're not even aware of this mystical process. A seemingly solid body consists of subatomic particles, kalapas, and their existence spans is less than a trillionth of a second. So all these subatomic particles, as we are speaking and listening, our bodies have changed, but not visible to the eye. So name and form is one aggregate. Here I just put down Professor Jerry since this is my name and form. Another aggregate, meaning a collection of processes, is feeling. Feeling includes the sensations that rise from the body and the mental feelings that come from that as well. Feelings can be pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. And all feelings and sensations are transitory. They don't last forever. Another aggregate for a person, a collection of processes, is discernment. This is the recognition, the interpretation of sensory inputs and mental objects. We begin by sensing these things and classifying and labeling them. And this classifying leads to recognition. We can go, ah, that's a chair. Ah, that's a television. Because as we begin to sense it, we can label it and classify it. Mental formations is the fourth psychophysical aggregate. This is the process of all mental events, thoughts, memories, volitional mental responses. And in Buddhism, all mental events are transitory and not independently existent. They always depend on our sensory inputs and our discernment to arise. The last of these five psychophysical aggregates is consciousness. Now, you might ask, why is consciousness not a soul? Because consciousness is not one entity, but it's an event. For Buddhism, it's a cognitive process. This is the manner of knowing an object. Consciousness is not some unitary thing we call I, a continual stream of a moment of awareness. Think of a consciousness as a necklace of pearls, a string of pearls, each moment connecting to the next one. But really, there's only one pearl since the past is left behind. Thus, asking whose consciousness is not appropriate. Now, we remember because there's a continuum of moments, so we have a sense because of continuity that there's something lasting. It's like a river, throwing a rock into a river. Have you thrown a rock into the same river as you did before? There are molecules of water that are the same as when you threw the rock the first time. But what about now? The river is constantly changing. The river is a process. And so is our consciousness. There are 6 types of consciousness according to Buddhism: visual, auditory, olfactory, gustatory, tactile, and mental. Even mental consciousness always arises and ceasing for each moment in time. And as you're listening to this lecture, you're not listening to a sub-commentary going on in your head. All 5 psychophysical aggregates are always in flux. They're not set. Each aggregate is in constant flux and cannot be considered permanent. And thus, these all 5 together make up the self, but the self then is not permanent. The third of Mahayana principles is emptiness, shunyata. This is not a principle usually found in Theravada, but it's found in Mahayana Buddhism. Here, the notion is that if something's real, it cannot be interdependent. It must exist on its own. This is in many ways tied to dependent origination. And we can look, for example, at water and waves. Waves can look like they're moving, but can you reach out and grab a wave? Can you take it out of the water? Now, obviously, if the water is frozen, and there have been frozen waves, you can cut the wave off, but is it still a wave when you're taking that piece of water out? The wave is not distinct. It's part of a process in the water. And we perceive part of that process as a thing, as a wave, but it's not. It's part of a process instead. This is emptiness. Now, the Madhyamaka school really championed emptiness, especially Nagarjuna. They argue that nothing arises except in dependence on something else. Yogacara, however, under Asanga in the 4th century CE, argues of what they call the Alaya Vijnana, the mind stratum. And they think that experience brings out seeds in our minds, our consciousness, and that things exist dependent upon the mind, which leaves the question, is the mind itself transitory or not? After discussing the 3 core principles in Mahayana Buddhism, impermanence, dependent origination, and emptiness, I'm sure questions abound. Some people often ask me, well, what is nirvana? What happens after we die? And what are the things that these 3 principles cannot explain? The Buddha once talked about a soldier who was shot with an arrow. As the soldier was laying there with an arrow in his chest, the Buddha came upon him and asked him, "Good soldier, let me help you out." And the soldier stopped and said, "Wait. Who shot the arrow? Why did they shoot the arrow at me?" And the Buddha held out his hand to ask the soldier to pause, and he said, "Good soldier, now is not the time to ask why you were hit and who did it. Now is the time to get the arrow out of your chest." And this was an answer the Buddha gave to one of those questions that still remains unresolved. The Buddha felt that this was not a point that we should focus on, that instead we should focus on getting out of samsara, not about what is after samsara. Needless to say, this didn't stop people from thinking or wondering. One interesting context to understand Mahayana Buddhism from is that by the 5th century CE, 95% of the population in South Asia were illiterate. Buddhism was an oral recitation early on, and the question is, do people have time to listen to all this information? How many people do you think would really accept these ideas of a non-self or non-soul? To what extent was this description of reality required in order to becoming a Buddhist? Mahayana Buddhist philosophers assumed there were mass amounts of people who would not understand their own philosophy. And this led to the question of who did they think would understand their philosophy? And who were the initial adherents? What were the conditions for it? Were the initial adherents monks or laity? And this also led to early schisms in Mahayana, such as between the Madhyamaka and Yogacara schools. Over the centuries, followers of particular Mahayana traditions have attacked Theravada Buddhist followers because Theravada is older than Mahayana. Mahayana is a reformation, and one way to claim that you are stronger or better or more pure than a tradition that's older than you is to attack the veracity and the legitimacy of that older tradition. Mahayana practitioners began to call people who did not follow their practice followers of the Hinayana, the lesser, the defunct, the vile vehicle. And this term doesn't really fit with Theravada Buddhists at all. Yet, still to this day, some books and articles will use the term Hinayana. In the same sense, followers of Mahayana have called Theravada people selfish because in Mahayana Buddhism, there is the platform that you should help every sentient person reach awakening. Whereas in Theravada Buddhism, there is no mandate of this. However, this argument that people under Theravada Buddhism are selfish is very flawed. Under Theravada Buddhism, dana, the virtue of generosity, is deeply, deeply upheld, and it's anything but selfish. However, there are some differences in place. In Mahayana Buddhism, there are bodhisattvas, people who are embodiments of virtues like wisdom and compassion that serve all sentient beings. Theravada doesn't really have this. And Theravada doesn't really focus on shunyata, emptiness. It does acknowledge the idea of impermanence and dependent origination, but there is not a lot of excavation into the issue and the dimension and the understanding of emptiness itself. One split that Theravada has from Mahayana is over the sense of kayas or bodies, whereas Mahayana has the stance of being a trikaya, 3 bodies. Theravada has dvikaya, 2 bodies. There is the rupakaya, which is the physical form of people and beings, and the physical form of the Buddha. In Theravada Buddhism, the Buddha is the historical Buddha who used to be alive. But in Theravada Buddhism, this Buddha is now gone. What he's left behind is the Dhammakaya. the teachings of the Buddha, the doctrine. And the Dhammakaya is the embodiment of truth. The Buddha was the embodiment of it, but he died, and thus the Dhamma, the Dharma, the doctrine, is the manifestation of it. The ultimate goal for Mahayana and Theravada Buddhism is nirvana, or as it's said in Theravada, nibbana. Under Mahayana doctrine, one can become awakened or enlightened, as you might call it, within a lifetime or within this very lifetime. However, in Theravada Buddhism, it's the longue durée. It takes many lifetimes. In Theravada Buddhism, there's 4 stages of awakening, in which you strive to cut off the 10 fetters of life that cause suffering. You initiate this process by accumulating enough merit to become a stream enterer. The stream enterer is one who enters the stream, a sotapanna, and after 6 successful rebirths after this, you'll become awakened. Upon becoming a stream enterer, you've been able to be released from 3 of the 10 fetters of life: belief in the self, skepticism, and attachment to rites and rituals. After more of these successful stages of rebirth, you come back as a once returner, a sakadagami. This means that you may be reborn once more before becoming awakened, and you've now been released from the 3 fetters of life, and you've weakened the next 2 fetters: sensuous craving and ill will. Your next rebirth, you come back as the non-returner, the anagami. This means you will not be reborn in this life, but in the heavens, where you will be able to attain awakening. And your release from the first 5 fetters of life now. Sensuous craving and ill will is now completely cut off. Last and finally, you become an arhat, the worthy one. You have achieved nibbana, and you've abandoned samsara, the cycle of rebirths. In this way, you're released from the 5 remaining fetters: the craving for fine material existence, the craving for immaterial existence, conceit, restlessness, and ignorance. There are 2 types of meditation in Theravada Buddhism, and of course there's many different styles for each of these meditations. Arhats are known to reach an awakening through meditation, and this is in addition to the merit, since the accomplishment of an arhat is the elimination of ignorance and its subsidiaries. Samatha is the focusing, the calming, and the pacifying form of meditation. This is where you clear your mind by calming the mind and body and quelling the energy and desires. And it's through honing your attention for hours on end, exercising the mind's concentration. Some people argue that samatha is the lesser of the 2 practices, but most often seen as a necessary component to the overall experience, because you cannot do vipassana meditation unless you've first been able to master samatha meditation. Vipassana meditation means to discern or have insight into the traits of existence. This employs deep forms of meditation in which you contemplate the existence of many things and of Buddhist principles, such as the Four Noble Truths. This deeply contemplative state breaks through the ordinary veil of existence. And as in the video that you can see on the right, this is from a movie called Doing Time, Doing Vipassana, in which people who were in maximum security prisons in India were doing Vipassana meditation and getting better and feeling remorse for their bad choices. Vipassana meditation is very popular today, and in fact, in the United States you can find Vipassana meditation retreats. But know this, that when you do this, generally speaking, it's not Vipassana, it's samatha, because you haven't reached the stage of being able to quell your energies and desires before you can do that insight meditation. In order to display the way that Theravada Buddhism operates in a very ethical and non-selfish way, I'm going to recount for you a Thai Buddhist sermon I heard in southern Thailand. This actually is part of the liturgy, but the monk himself was an abbot and said this to a wide audience of mostly middle-aged women and some men. Notice that within this sermon, the story, there are morals, cautions, and in many ways a reinforcement of taking care and paying heed to being kind to monks. When you're doing something, it'll be good to set a will. Take, for instance, the Lord Buddha when he was in his previous lives, especially in the last life, when he was the Prince Vesantara. Every time he gave away things for charity, he would make merit from his charity, and this helped him find a way to nibbana, to be free from all mortal temptations and sorrow. Even when he gave away his children and wife for charity, he made merit. And so we, Buddhists, should be inclined so that the merit of our good deeds will bring us a prosperous life until we reach nibbana. It is a matter of beliefs, but there's a tale a long time ago about a husband and wife. The wife is a virtuous and righteous person. She liked to go to the Wat, listen to Dhamma, and meditate. Every day after she finished her housework, she would go and help out at the Wat. Wat here means monastery. Now, oppositely, her husband was arrogant and had incorrect thoughts. He was not happy with the fact that his wife went to the Wat every day, so he always complained about it to his wife. But the wife stayed calm. She knew that she was doing something good and it would increase her personal merit. She believed that one's present fate is affected by past merit. Like me and all of you here, we were born healthy and complete partially due to our past merits. That is what the wife believed. Finally, the husband was so displeased that his wife kept going to the monastery that he scolded her when she got back from the monastery and accused her of having an affair with the monks. She defended herself, saying that she went to do good things, but the husband didn't listen. She didn't know what to do, so before she went to bed, she prayed, lighting 3 incense sticks while asking Lord Buddha that in the next lives, may she never get this narrow-minded man as her husband. May she never have anything to do with him again. The husband saw his wife making that wish, so he also lit up the incense sticks and made a wish that in his next lives, may he always have this woman as his wife, and may they never be apart. After they died, the wife was reborn as a beautiful lady, a rich man's daughter with a virtuous and kind heart. Every morning she would make merit at her house, giving food to the beggars, and the husband, because he hadn't done any good deeds in his past life, was reborn as a very poor, unemployed man, and had to beg for food to survive. He heard that they gave away food at the rich man's house every morning, so he went there to receive some food. When he got there, the lady told all the beggars to queue up, and since the past husband beggar came late, he was the last one in the row. The lady started giving food from the front of the row all the way down, but when it was the last beggar's turn, there was no more food left for him. The next day, the beggar thought that yesterday he was at the end of the line, so he didn't get any food. So this day, he went early and he was in the front of the line. However, the lady thought that yesterday she gave food from the front, and that the person at the back didn't get any food. So she went to make merit this morning. She started getting food from the rear up, and when she reached the beggar in the front, the food was all gone, and he didn't get any food for the second day. So the third day, the beggar stayed in the middle of the row, hoping to get some food this time. But the lady thought that about the last 2 days, and today she decided to get food from both ends, from the rear and the front. And when it reached the middle where her past husband was, the food was all gone for the third time. The lady noticed that this beggar has received no food for 3 days. She wanted to give him some food, but it didn't seem like he didn't have enough merit. Hence, he was not meant to receive her charity. She called her past husband in and gave him a bow with 5 arrows. She told him that if he shot the arrows in the forest and they hit any tree, he could come back and receive as much food as he wanted. The beggar went to a very dense forest, but his arrows hit no tree at all. Thus he couldn't receive any fruit from the lady because he didn't do any good charity of any sort in his past life. This tale shows what is important when making a wish. The wife wanted to get away, and the husband wanted to follow her, but even when he met her in another life, there's nothing he could do with her because he didn't do any merit that would enable his wish to come true. So before you do any charity or good deeds, wish for good things. And here's an image I took when I was listening to the sermon. This was during a Katin ceremony, during Kalpansa, the end of the rain retreat in Thailand, which usually happens in the end of October or early November. And notice that throughout this tale, that's Theravada, is impressing upon the listeners of generosity, earning merit, being kind, which is not selfish, but virtuous in its own way. I hope that you were able to get a glimpse or a basic understanding of Buddhist doctrine through this lecture. Please make sure to answer the questions posted on Blackboard for the week and the discussion thread for week 3. Do not forget to respond to at least 2 of your classmates' answers as well. These answers and responses are all due before Friday at 5 p.m. Of course, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to me at mjerryson@gmail.com. I look forward to reading your answers. See you next time.